Okay. So I call to order the special meeting of the Board of Commissioners of the Town of Pittsboro for November 5th, 2020. And Chris, I'll turn it over to you to handle the general overview of the agenda and introduction.
Okay, great. Thank you. First off, I appreciate everybody being flexible and to have this meeting tonight. As you know, the budget is a really important thing for us and really our lifeblood. So I like to not feel rushed and have a real thorough process that we can go through this. We can have the conversations that we need to have. We can give ourselves the time to properly vet numbers, projects, things of that nature. So the earlier we start this, the better. To hopefully, have a really good and succinct budget process that everyone's aware of what we're budgeting for, both board members and the general public themselves. And we can make it usually a stressful process, hopefully not so stressful. So going over the agenda, obviously kind of a general overview of the agenda here. I did put some time slots to try to keep us on track. I think it's important to understand this is not the only meeting we're going to have about this. We'll have some conversations about what you would like in that process. But if we don't cover something or we don't get all the way through, it's not a crisis here. We can certainly schedule another time to finish the conversation or have more in-depth conversation about individual items if we so choose to do so. Again, this is kind of the first scoping session of it, and we'll go from there and do what we got to do to get the budget passed. So we've got kind of the budget schedule for fiscal year 21-22. We'll go over that. We've got going over some current revenues in our existing budget year, the continuation requests that will go into next year's budget, discussion of some new budget requests, which I think will probably be the bulk of our conversation this evening. We'll then wrap up with talking about any of those projects we just discussed, about whether we want to fund some of that in this fiscal year, and then an adjournment. So sounds simple enough to run through all that, but there's a lot of information to talk about in a municipal budget with both water, sewer, general fund, and all that good stuff. So we'll get into it. The first thing I want to kind of cover is, I think, the general idea behind the budget. And as you may have heard me say, that your budget is the best way for you to memorialize and symbolize your priorities. As they say, you put your money where your mouth is. And so that's exactly what our budget is that the things that you desire, the things you think that our citizens and residents need, that the best way to establish that policy is in the budget. In terms of the process itself, obviously you'll be dealing with myself. Statutorily, as town manager, I am the budget officer. And so the budget is my responsibility and one of my primary charges as town manager.
Yeah.
And so I take that very seriously. And so I want to be that resource for you as you have questions. I certainly can't do this by myself. I've got a lot of staff that will help me, primarily Heather Meacham, our finance director. She and I will work intimately with all of you, as well as our department heads to make sure you've got a approvable budget. And so as we go through that process, you'll be talking with us more than anybody else. A couple terms and definitions I want to kind of cover before we jump into it, because I don't want to lose anybody in the terminology. And I don't know what you may have been accustomed to before, but these are kind of the terms that I've grown to use, and they mean different things. I just want to make sure everyone understands what they are. So the first one is available fund balance. I use this term with the general fund, and this is our unassigned, unrestricted, and unencumbered money. Basically, it is free to do with whatever you would like to do. On the enterprise fund side, or utility fund, I refer to the very same concept as retained earnings. You'll notice there's a difference there because the enterprise fund runs like a business. And so retained earnings is more of a business type term. And so when you hear me say available fund balance, or AFB, I'm talking about the general fund. If you hear me talk about retained earnings, I'm talking about the enterprise fund. And so they functionally mean the same thing. Again, unassigned, unencumbered, and unrestricted, but they're different functions for different budgets. Another term is revenue neutral. There's a lot of literature out there. It's probably one of the most confusing things that you could possibly deal with. we deal with this mostly in revaluation years. And so as we go through a revaluation, you know, the property values go up. And so our tax rate currently is 43 pennies and change, no pun intended. And so when we go to revenue neutral, presuming that the real estate values will go up, our revenue neutral rate will actually be below that. So as value goes up in real estate, typically it shifts as you grow from individual property, private property into real estate property. And so we get more there. And so the revenue neutral rate, and basically what that is that as the proportionality of costs and revenue goes together, the overall tax rate can either stay the same or decrease. And so there's a proportionality there. Again, there's a lot of literature about it. School government's got a bunch of resources through Coates Canons, and we can have more conversation about that as well. But that'll be a term you hear. And then again, revaluation. That is something there that if you're interested in revaluation, there's an act called the Machinery Act. Every 8 years, we are required to do a revaluation. Most counties do it every 4, but you'll notice if there was a reval, you know, in 08 to 2012, they tried not to do revals because they didn't want the property values to go down. If you're spiking and have a lot of development going on, they're going to want to do it more frequently. You can do it as often as you would like. Most counties do it every 4 to 8 years, and you're required by law to do it every 8. So those are kind of the basic terms that you may hear us talk about through the budget process that I've at least identified. If you hear something else and you say, hey, Chris, I have no idea what that is, please stop me. We'll go over that and make sure that you're comfortable. And like many things, there are no dumb questions. So I'll be happy to walk you through any of that. Any questions on that before we go into the budget schedule for this preparing fiscal year 21-22?
Chris, I don't have any questions on that, but for some reason I can't get that up on your agenda up on my iPad.
Okay. Are you in your SharePoint?
I'll put it up.
Yeah, Cassie, if you want to put it on the screen, that's fine too. We don't have any other packet material, so we can either look at each other or we can look at the screen and look at smaller boxes. Either one's fine.
All right.
Thank you, Jay. For the budget schedule, obviously the first thing is our budget scoping session. That is today, for us to kind of scope this thing out, talk about it, see where we're at. As we go from here, and it's important for me to have this conversation with the board, because when I have conversations with the department heads, I want to make sure that any priorities that come from the board are folded into their requests. We want to make sure that your requests are considered sooner than not. Again, we don't want to get to the budget retreat in April or later and say, oh, I didn't know you want to do that. I can't get a price. I don't even know what to budget for on that. So again, the sooner that we know something, the better. The budget forms and development of fiscal year 21-22. We're planning to have the capital forms to our department heads on November 30th, so just in a few weeks here. And the reason we do capital ahead of O&M is this continuation costs. So what's your training and travel budget? Did it go up? Did it stay the same? Is your cell phone bill the same? Those are less volatile. Your capital projects are your one-time things, your multiple year things that may have not been contemplated before. There's a little more time and effort that's required to speak with consultants to see what you need to fold into your capital budget. And so we start with those first to give a little more time to everyone so they can, if they have for whatever reason, they can't get it to us in a couple of weeks that we provide them in December, they do have time overall to get that prepared for the budget. And again, so December is basically tailored to capital. When we get to January 4th, the O&M forms, continuation forms will go out to the department heads. Those will be due a couple weeks later. We are looking at right now, basically the first week of February. I've tailored it to February 3rd for us to meet, Heather and I, to meet with our department heads to go over their budget requests, make sure we understand them correctly, make sure that if there's any anomalies, if an individual department budget was $300,000 for the last 5 years and all of a sudden it's $700,000 and we don't see why, we need to have that conversation to make sure why that budget is going up. So that's a precursor conversation that staff only as we prepare that budget. We go from there then to April 7th as it's time slotted. And again, all these dates are workable. They're just intended to be placeholders for now, especially as it gets to the Board of Commissioners. If those days don't work, we like to stay within the week if we can. But for whatever reason, if something comes up, those days can move. There'll be special meetings, much like today. So for the department head retreat, that'll be March 3rd. And basically what that is we call like kind of the war room of, hey, we only have, X amount of dollars in revenue. We're over budget by 300K. We need to sit together in a room and figure out whose projects take priority. And it's a winners and losers type thing. We'd love to fund everything, but we want to be very trim with our budget. We want to do right by our taxpayers and our ratepayers. And so that is for us to get that budget dialed in advance of it going to you. So there's a heightened scrutiny with the group of department heads there. Then when we get to April 7th, that is when we have slotted for the Board of Commissioners budget retreat. As you have seen in the calendar that I sent out to you a few weeks ago in the emails for my weekly updates, I've got that scheduled for 9 a.m. And that's kind of an all-day thing as needed. And basically what that is that when we leave that room that day, you have a budget in place for all intents and purposes. And so what we'll do that day is Heather and I will go over the budget. We'll go over revenues. We'll go over any unique projects that have been there. And there'll be presentations provided to you that day as well. And so other partners, maybe the Pittsburgh Fire Department, Main Street Pittsburgh, individual department heads talking about projects, basically is to provide you the comfort that you say, hey, this is a new request or a continuation request that we want to have conversations about. That day is intended for that and to allow you to talk about those things. What we would also like to do that day is with that budget, provide you available fund balance that's dedicated just to special projects. And so as we go through this process, I would like to know how much you would like allocated for kind of one-off special projects. And so, there are certain things that we look at from a staff perspective, but there are things that you hear from that say, hey, I think it's a worthwhile project. I think we should, spend $50,000 on this. My effort is to try to give you that kind of money. It could be 100,000, could be 200,000, whatever you think's appropriate to say, hey, I think this is a one-off project for this individual year that we need to attend to and allow the board to have that conversation about what that may be. And so to provide some of that there. Again, it may be a given year where there's nothing there and you say there's no reason to have that, and that's just fine. But having that conversation so that you can do that if you would like, I think is important. And then our budget hearings, we're required only to have one hearing. It would be my recommendation to the board that we have two, or that we split the hearing up. We are looking at May 10th for our first budget hearing. And if you recall, we adopted the budget this past year in June. It doesn't leave a lot of room for other people to review it. It doesn't leave a lot of room for us to make adjustments. So my recommendation would be that first meeting and Board of Commissioners meeting, the regular meeting we do the budget hearing at that meeting on the 10th. We then take any feedback we have, we apply that to the budget as needed, and then we come back to you on the 24th, either with a continued meeting or a completely separate budget hearing number 2. And then we say, okay, great. We folded this in. Anybody have any other questions? And then after 2 meetings, if someone still has something, there's still time before June 30th. We would like very much to adopt the budget on the 24th. From an operational standpoint, having the budget adopted in May gives us and finance the ability to do all our reconciliations to wrap up the fiscal year in June. We can chase down invoices. We can talk to consultants who we require invoices from, project statuses, making sure items are delivered, because if they're not delivered before June 30th, we can't pay for them that year. And so there's a lot of work to be done in June. So having that budget buttoned up is a big saving grace, because we'll spend June and July doing reconciliation, and then we're already into the audit as we get from the end of July into August. And so kind of moving this up a few months gives us a little breathing room and allows us to have a better life for our finance people for sure. The only other thing I have on that for the budget schedule is some conversation. Again, we can have it as we go organically through this conversation, but is having that laid out, what other types, and Mr. Shipp sent an email today about it, of what kind of public outreach do we want to see in advance of the budget. Obviously, all the meetings we have will be public meetings. People can log into this meeting, they can log into your budget retreat, all those types of things. So we want to be open and clear about it. We want to have the budget posted on the website as soon as we can. And obviously caveat draft form and things of that nature. But I'm interested in what the board has done in the past with the town, and given my first budget cycle here is this year, and what would you like to see that maybe hasn't been done before that you think we could do outreach wise?
More, I'll say. I know, this year we didn't, and I think, there's a lot of suggestions in that email, but we didn't have any public comments on the budget this year. And that's probably related to COVID and how we were doing meetings and things like that. But I think starting the process now is going to help immensely, that we're talking about it, and people would generally have the opportunity to talk during meetings from now through May about it, and we'll be talking about it more. So I think that helps, just talking about it, amongst us more earlier and more frequently. But some community meetings or things on it. Of course, this is all pending COVID and what we can do. So maybe it's Zoom meetings or things. But I think even that kind of sit down interview type short video of how the process works was really helpful, and would be good to update for Pittsboro and put out on Facebook and some of the other. I guess that's the only social media I know of, but I know there's others.
We can put videos on the website too.
Yeah,
we can link to, and and I said the board what Durham's doing. Obviously, Durham has an army of budget analysts and things that help with their stuff, but we can try to find something with that. Again, I think trying to have more of these meetings earlier, perhaps more frequently in a public forum, having 2 meetings in May to talk about it, and actually giving time for people to actually comment. In my history, people don't really say a whole lot about the budgets. There'll be individual items that are brought up that can get folded in there. But generally, there's not a ton of comment. But again, I've never done a budget in Pittsboro, so I'm leaning on y'all to guide me about what you think the town should do. I'm happy to do whatever. I think hopefully the more that, if we're all hoping that COVID subsides and we can be more interactive with our public, I'm happy to hold meetings, downtown, set up shop at the Welcome Center and just say, hey, I'm here to talk about the budget for a couple of hours, whatever you'd like to ask me. If you got questions about it, if you have suggestions, things of that nature, I think we can all accommodate that. And so I'm open to having it, because again, the more input we have, the more solid the document becomes, and the more advocates that you have for your budget. And so again, especially if there's ever a tax increase of any kind, or a rate increase of any kind, having that public input and being able to take the time to explain those types of things, and showing the value in those increases is a really good way to make sure that you don't get to June 15th and realize that a firestorm is about to occur because of it.
Chris, historically, at least with my history on the board, there's been very little public comment on the budget.
Mm-hmm.
This is the earliest that I think I've participated in the budget. And I think it's great, because there have been times when I felt pinched and didn't have a chance to truly digest everything. And So I think that's really helpful. And I think the more public meetings, like these that we have and that we announce and make known to the public are occurring, yeah, the better we'll be. But yeah, historically, there was one gentleman years ago that would show up pretty regularly and grouse about what the budget was spending its money on. But really very little feedback. And just a corollary is we do special use permits and we get very little, public comment. So seems to be the nature of the beast in Pittsburgh.
Well, and again, you can have that situation where, especially if we're, the second meeting in June, if I'm a resident and I recognize the budget has to be adopted by June 30th, what's the point of me
Right.
saying anything?
Yeah.
Nothing's likely to change. I'm going to waste some time on a Monday night to go gripe at my commissioners about something that the budget's going to get adopted in 8 days. It has to be. So again, I think hopefully starting the process earlier, we hope that there's some constructive comments back and forth and at least some input and buy-in from our citizenry.
Yeah, agreed.
Great. All right, well, we'll jump on to current revenues and fiscal year 2021 updates. So again, everyone knows our tax rate is 0.43333. Our value there is, per our budget, is $60,432 per penny. So that gives us our revenue on that side, just the ad valorem revenue. Our general fund balance right now in the general fund is $3.451 million, which is about 64% of available fund balance. The budget overall for the general fund is 5.412. The enterprise fund, we are sitting, their budget for current fiscal year is $3.993 million. Our retained earnings balance is at 52%, which is $2.079 million. And we're looking very good so far on our sales tax. We are right now, and I'm only going to use September 1st because we've got clear numbers on that. As of September 1st, basically the 1/6 of the way through the budget year, we're sitting at $56,012 above projections in our sales tax. And so Heather's been good and got me some numbers, and right now we're projecting to be 221,000 over expected in our sales tax revenue, which is really good. Obviously, we passed a conservative budget given COVID. We're still not out of the woods there in terms of a lot of sales tax revenue, but we are trending in a good positive direction. So I'm pleased with those numbers. As we go further down the agenda, we'll have some conversations about those percentages. We talked about the available fund balance and retained earnings and kind of what our current policy is and where my recommendation to the board where we need to be moving forward with that. Any questions on that one before we jump into the continuation request?
Chris, you said 3.451 available fund balance. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. In the general fund. Yes, sir.
And then 2.07 retained earnings.
Yeah, 2.079.
9. Got it.
Yep. So almost 2.08.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
And so basically we're sitting at 64% and 52% respectively in our, again, unencumbered, unassigned, and unrestricted revenue. Looking at the continuation budgets, capital projects, we don't have a lot of capital projects in this current budget year. I think some of that is some historical precedent. I've looked back a couple of years. There's not a lot of capital requests outside of vehicles and some software updates, a few projects here or there, but very few capital projects themselves. Debt service, we're pretty light on debt service, which is good. We're not overly saturated. Our total debt service for both funds is $357,000 of principal. And so our debt service payment for this fiscal year is $97,000. And so for the next year, what we have currently on the books, we have $259,000 in principal and 100K in debt service payment next year. So again, not overly saturated in debt, which is a good thing. We have some big projects coming online. Obviously, we know about the Sanford Sewer Line and its debt service for the enterprise fund. We've got the town hall project, which is going to have some debt service on the general fund side. We've got a ladder truck apparatus to be bought by us for the Pittsburgh Fire Department. And we're looking at some funding options there. We've received some really favorable quotes in terms of, I'll say, the percentages. And so I'm working with Chief Griffin and Heather on that to find some good numbers there. So far, we've been able to get better numbers than the fire department has. And so by a decent amount on the interest rates. So really what we're looking at is how we want to separate that line item through the budget years. You know, do we want to do 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, et cetera? A ladder truck apparatus will usually have a lifespan of 20 years. So you typically don't want to always be paying on a ladder truck because there'll be another one falling right up to it. So, and knowing there will be other apparatus requests, you know, I think the shorter the better, but obviously we've got to make the numbers work. And so our revenues will be increasing with all the growth and development that we're seeing. But we want to be very conscious about where we're at today. O&M costs, again, these are just costs that are just to keep our operation going. I mean, our utilities don't change all that much. But at the same time, we have to be vigilant in understanding where those costs come from, because when we look at, you know, our power bill, Duke Energy went up 14.1% last year. You know, there's no consumer price index that, you know, most things are going to go up, you know, 2.4, 3.2%. They've done that for the last 10 years. But, you know, you get a 14% increase, you'll miss the mark. And when you have a number of buildings and other lighting fixtures, so to speak, that's a significant amount of money. And so, but those are the types of things that's O&M. You know, it's your salaries, it's your retirement, which is going up again. You know, the state has their scale plan as they step up in the percentages. Obviously, different percentages with police and regular employees. And so that's really where those costs are variable, and those will go up annually just because the nature of the beast of CPI is being applied. One thing that we'll have there too is us working with our partners. Obviously, you know, Main Street Pittsburgh, Chatham County EDC, the Boys and Girls Club potentially as they're coming online, the fire department monies that are provided to them, any other partners like that we have. We need to get with them early in this process as well, make sure that their numbers are going to stay the same or approximately the same or whatever they are, that we can account for that in the budget. We don't want to presume that, you know, Chatham County EDC is $7,500 and they come in at 25,000. That's a significant jump. I'm not saying that they will, but that's why we need to have those conversations sooner than not. And so those, again, part of those will be part of your budget retreat, but also just some outreach on my part and our team's part here to make sure that we keep those costs like at least well pegged and allow the board to make those decisions about what they want to do with some of those partnerships. Any questions on the continuation side? All right. Well, I want to save the bulk of the time for our discussion of the new budget requests. And so we're doing really good on time right now because I want to be really considerate of everyone's time this evening. So the first thing on here is the fund balance policy. Right now, our fund balance policy in the general fund is 10%, which is extremely low. 8%, there is no state requirement. The LGC, the Local Government Commission, specifies 8% or suggests 8%. If we got to 10%, I promise you the LGC would be calling us. And so to put that in perspective, 8% is 30 days of operations. So basically, if we had no other revenue, we could pay our bills for 30 days. I would say long-term, we're probably looking at a fund balance policy of probably 25%. I would recommend in the next 5 years, that we strive to get to 50%. The smaller your budget, the more volatile your budget is. And this rainy day money that is available for, emergency management things that could come up with a hurricane and eat you alive. Any other type of project that may need to come up, having those fund balance policies in place is really important. And so I would recommend that we increase it above 10. I think, again, when we're getting closer to build outs, 10, 15, 20 years, our tax rate will most certainly go down, even though our expenditures will go up. I think, 43 pennies will be in excess of what we will likely need. I can't completely forecast that just yet because I don't know where our operation will quite be. But I do think in order to reduce some volatility within our budget and beefing up that rainy day fund. Again, right now we sit at 64% of available fund balance in the general fund. So we're already there in some regard. But right now what we're showing is basically that is, 44% or 54% above where we actually specify we need to be. So we're doing it kind of, I think, de facto. I just think it would be good to have that policy in place. And the difference that is there is when you go to budget. So let's say I have a $10,000 expense and I'm going to go buy a lawnmower. Well, if I buy that in next year's budget, I actually have to budget $15,000 for a $10,000 lawnmower because I'm going to put 50% of that into that rainy day fund. And so everything that we do, we will budget at 150% if that's our fund balance number. So right now we budget at 110%, which is a really volatile number. You can miss by 10% a lot in budgeting. And so again, with the smaller amount of our budget, $5 million is not a big general fund budget, and $4 million is nowhere close to a big enterprise fund budget. I think to protect ourselves from the revenue side, especially enterprise, it's really volatile. If people stop using water, you don't get revenue. You get sewer rates and such, and there's availability fees. But again, I would recommend that both are 50%. Enterprise fund will likely stay closer to 50%, even as we build out. Obviously, we'll assess that as we get closer to those things. You might want to do 25 or 35 if we are just flush with cash at that point. But knowing the amount of projects we'll have to do in the enterprise fund and the fact that, a quarter-mile water line's a couple $1 million in an emergency or a sewer line, that money can evaporate rather quickly. You can just ask NCDOT about available fund balance and retained earnings and how quickly that can disappear with some unexpected expenditures. And so again, 8% is 30 days, 25% is 90 days, and 50% is 180 days. And so that allows us to pay our bills. And so it just, as we grow, the number can decrease, and we're already there. But we'll have more conversation on that. Any questions on that before I move on to the capital project funds?
No, I think that was a really helpful explanation about 110 and 150% though. I hadn't thought of it like that previously.
Yeah, I gather what you're saying, and you've articulated it very well. But if I may, I'll put it in my own words. It sounds like you're proposing that we have a deeper keel for when the sieves get rough.
Correct. Again, so to put in perspective, Mecklenburg County, which is a mega operation, their available fund balance is $800 million. And so, but to them, that is about, I'm trying to remember, I think it's like 75 days for them that they would spend $800 million, which is absurd. Pittsburgh may have never spent $800 million in its entire creation. And so the bigger you get, your fund balance policy can decrease a little bit because there's just outright more money. And so, 52% on the enterprise fund, which is $2 million, but that's barely one project if something were to fail.
Yeah.
And so when that budget goes from 4 million to 40 million, in theory, having a fund balance policy where there's, instead of being at 20 million, you might be at 25% and you have $10 million. Well, we feel a lot better about having $10 million when we're at 40 million than we do having 2 million at 4 million. And so the percentages and the volatility there obviously ease as the more money you get.
So as you think about this fund balance policy, are there benefits to plotting out a course of increases? Say, this year we increase it from 10% to 15 or 20%, and then in future years, some date certain, we strive to revisit that to be 30% and then on up to 50% or whatever.
Absolutely. And that I was anticipating that question would be asked, because to go from 110, again, the general fund is 10%, the enterprise fund policy is 25 currently. So if the board agrees and we desire to ramp up, we don't have to do it in one budget year. Again, we're going to be looking at our costs and making sure that we can afford it. And again, you're just kind of hedging your bet, saying, I think we're going to be okay, but we would like to go from 10% to 15 or 20% this year. And then the next year we'll go to either 25 or 30 potentially. Or we might get to a point where it just levels out and we're saying, okay, good, we're at 25, we're fine. We have the amount of rainy day funds that we can pay our bills without any other revenues coming in, and we're fine. And so that is a very logical and a very reasonable approach to kind of ramp up into it and not just try to do it in one budget year.
Okay.
Chris, I think part of our discussion about leaving it relatively low, knowing that we were in pretty good shape, was the idea that we didn't want to, I think, hamstring ourselves if in fact there were some expenditures to be had during the course of the year. So I think that's part of the balance.
Right. And I can say that if we establish a 25 or 50 or whatever the number is, the LGC or an external organization is not going to come beat down the door because we had to go to 21% and allocate and appropriate money from that. What that is that when Heather and I present stuff to you and we budget at 100, let's say it's 125%. If that gives us $5 million and we say, okay, don't touch this $5 million, that's our rainy day fund. Again, it's there to be occasionally used. And so if you were ever to dip below that and we had to spend $1 million on something and we said, hey, I just want the board to know that we're dipping into our reserve fund here and we're going to go under 25%. That number is just kind of placed there so that we say, oh no, it's almost like when you hit your, and hopefully none of us are hitting that anytime soon, when you get to your checking account and it gets below $35 and they say, hey, alarms, you're under $35. You haven't overdrafted, but you're below that threshold that you said that you want a text alert. And so we can use that. Again, and over time, and again, I very much understand your point of we want some flexibility because historically you've been in excess of that amount and it's really not been an issue. And so I think it will be fine to look at different percentages so that we can establish the proper rainy day fund. But again, it's there for a reason to occasionally use, but that kind of synthetic threshold is there so we can alert you to say, hey, you're dipping into your reserve fund if you want to do this, and just want to make the board aware of that.
Yeah, I think it's probably important to keep that perception of that line. I think previously we really saw it as a hard line not to cross, whereas, from your perspective and that description, it's like, bear in mind this line is here, but it's not a hard line to cross, right? That if you need to do it, you can do it. Whereas the 10% was like, okay, now the sirens, Sharon Harris's whistle is going off.
If you get to 10%, the LGC will be knocking on the door. They will be calling me. I can promise you that. That's where I get fired. Y'all get voted out of office, and a whole new board and a whole new manager's dealing with this if we get below 10%. So, but again, we'll have more conversation on that. And again, we'll see where the revenues come in and say, hey, we're actually projecting to be above where we thought we would be. Does the board want to touch the policy at all? Do you want to bump it up? And again, all that can be handled as we go through this process. But great feedback so far. I very much appreciate that. Moving on to creation of capital project funds. These are capital project funds. We have a couple of them. I think we could utilize them more, especially as we get into some of these other projects. These are kind of pseudo savings accounts. Capital project funds survive the budget year. And so if we establish a capital project fund and put X amount of dollars towards affordable housing, then that money will stay in that fund until we close the fund. And so it would be my recommendation that for affordable housing, for sidewalks, for stormwater, for streets, recreation, town hall already has one, other individual projects like the Sanford sewer line, all these types of things have that kitty, if you will, so that, like when Ford Dupree gets going on this project and there's an affordable housing check cut to the town, those $788,000 go into the affordable housing capital project fund. The board has that in there. It will stay in there as a savings account. The money is tied to those types of projects. Once it goes capital, it can go back to the general fund, but generally it stays as capital. And so, because let's say we have town hall project, we put money in there. We're not going to build multiple town halls. So when that project's done, we'll close the fund, we'll amend the project ordinance that created that fund, and we'll appropriate that money back to either another capital project or back to the general fund or the enterprise fund, wherever it originally came from. And so obviously, and funds do not stay open forever. So what you'll see long-term is I'll work with Heather, and we'll likely have capital project funds that may last, I'll say 5 to 10 years on average. And so what we'll have is we'll create a sidewalk project fund, for instance, and then we'll have sidewalks phase 2 capital project fund in maybe 8 years. From an accounting perspective, you just need to kind of close them out from time to time from a custodial purposes of it. And so you close that fund, you just allocate it to the next fund and move on from there. But I think with a lot of the projects we have, there's been conversations about, more sidewalks. We have a fee in lieu of for sidewalks. Well, where does that fee go?
Yeah.
It goes into, our general budget, but we can then put that money into the capital project fund. And the benefit there is when you have the fund balance policy, you do not have to budget 150% on the capital project funds or whatever your percentage is. That's where you save that money. Is that if you're appropriating funds into the capital projects, it's a $1 to $1, not 110% or 150%. And so there's some savings there overall on the tax rate. So not only from board appropriations to those funds, but also appropriations from fees in lieu of type funds can go in those to fund those projects. And then when we buy the infrastructure, we go put in a mile of sidewalk, we just draw down from that fund, and whatever's left stays in the fund, and we just reappropriate it again. And so they're unique ways for us to not have to reappropriate every single year and say, well, we know we want to do sidewalks. Well, you can just put it there, leave it in there, and put more money the next year if you so desire. Obviously, if there's no money in the fund, probably close the fund. And so they all have project lives, but I think it'll be a little easier to figure out our budget as well by doing that, because you'll see the general operations. You'll see capital projects in O&M, which would mainly be vehicles. We don't really set up capital project funds for vehicles. Those are typically just capital expenditures that go into the O&M budget. But for all of our projects, bathrooms at our parks, parks equipment, all playground stuff, a splash pad, all that money can be appropriated to a recreation fund. And so again, it allows us to quickly flip through the budget, figure out where some of those projects lie, how much money is in those project funds, and it allows kind of both us and the public to see kind of where the money lies. Any questions on that concept? Nope, good.
No, big thumbs up though.
Oh, good.
I think that's precisely the way we need to go on these projects. I think That's excellent in my view.
Great. So for capital projects themselves, obviously we're going to be looking at streets and sidewalks. We've received a little bit of money from the fees in lieu of for sidewalks. We've had more conversations again as we try to create the better connectivity, especially if you look at our downtown infrastructure. There's a significant amount of improvements that need to be done downtown. Just creating a nice public space outside of our buildings. We have beautiful old buildings, but some of the sidewalk work needs to be improved. We've been able, fortunately, to partner with Main Street Pittsboro and those folks to get some of that revamped. I anticipate we'll do more of that. Create better, ADA accessibility. I'm a big fan personally of designing where ADA is not special; it's just the norm. Where we can design, because who doesn't enjoy a nice wide sidewalk? Who doesn't enjoy, not having to go down a steep slope ramp? And so it's not just, the ambulatory impaired or the wheelchair bound folks that need this stuff. It's nice for all of us. Thank goodness for those of us who don't have to worry about such things, but it's nice to make that just the norm. And I think it creates a nice aesthetic around our downtown. So I think we'll have some capital projects related to that. Obviously, there's been a lot of conversation about some of our water and sewer infrastructure. We have our sewer asset management plan that was done a couple of years ago. I think we need to ramp that up. I&I, the inflow infiltration has been a big concern. We have way too much clay pipe, way too much galvanized pipe. And so we really need to be intentional with those projects and make sure they're getting done, and set aside some money every single year to make sure we're renewing manholes. We're doing, slip line and pipe, putting new pipe in the ground, whatever it may be, just so we're not bleeding cash. We're not losing water. We're not unnecessarily having water breaks. We have fire pressure, which obviously we saw a lot of impact of that when the courthouse burned. The sewer, I don't have to explain to this group of people about how important sewer is right now. And so having those I&I projects attended to is going to be a real big thing for us, to lack of a better way to put it. But so yeah, that's kind of where we are capital project wise. That's also one that, as well as the new other projects and the staffing needs. I'm interested in if there's other projects that aren't street or sidewalks or kind of the water and sewer that the board is thinking about from a capital perspective at this time.
Chris, I think one you mentioned and I think it was on previously is improvements at existing parks, and things like bathrooms specifically, but other improvements as well, as we add new parks, that we make sure we keep our existing parks up to or get them up to a standard and keep them there.
Yep. And that could be everything from fencing, around the parks. That we have some chain link and galvanized around town, and it would be nice if we can have nice new fencing in some areas, and just kind of refurbishing some of what we have too. I think it's gonna be really important, especially as we have the nice and shiny brand new parks. To make sure that all the neighborhoods are kind of getting some attention from a park perspective, because as we grow, those types of things become more and more important. That's the quality of life that separates a small town from a medium-sized town or larger town. Usually where you see your upgrades is in your infrastructure and in your parks and programming that come along with that.
Yeah. And then it's not exactly in this area, but for example, we have a wonderful setup of tennis courts that over the years we allowed to decay to the point that they're no longer usable and they can't be repaired. And what we've got to make sure we do going forward on some of these things is that we spend sufficient amount of time and effort taking care of them so that they last. And we don't put a whole bunch of money into something only to let it decay to the point where it's no longer valuable to the community.
Right. It's the whole idea of, do you spend $200,000 on tennis courts and not touch them for 30 years?
Yeah.
And then I spend another 200,000, or do you spend 200,000 to have the tennis court? And then every year, every 5 years, you spend a little bit of money to keep them up.
Right.
You don't lose your court, you don't lose the sub base of it, and
Yeah.
you end up spending less money long-term because you're trying to spend money to maintain it. And so I would agree. I think having that maintenance schedule, same would go for our roads. Having a good crack sealing program. A lot of people don't like the look of a graffiti road, if you will. But crack sealing can add 3 to 5 years of life on that road. It also protects the sub base. Making sure that we resurface on a proper schedule, and not having to, because again, if you let it go too far, then you have to do the whole sub base over again, and you get a really expensive project. Milling and repaving is far less expensive than having to rebuild a road. And so again, I think we're going to be making our maintenance programs a little more robust than perhaps what we've done in the past, and try to get on better schedules so we don't outright lose infrastructure.
Where does the water treatment upgrade, whichever alternative we choose, fall into this whole thing?
That's capital.
And that would be, you'd recommend as a specific capital project as you described earlier?
I would probably create a capital project fund called Water Treatment Plant Improvements.
Great. Okay.
And basically we would work with our consultants on developing what those projects would be. We would get a budget estimated for that. We'd go to y'all and say, hey, I need, $500,000 or whatever the number may be for upgrades, and put it in that capital project fund. And again, it'll probably be a phased approach. It might be over 5 years. And that way, exactly what to put in that budget every year. And so you put in the capital project fund. I think it'd be a great way to do that. That's a really good example.
Chris, you had mentioned the downtown sidewalks and the ADA, and there are a whole host of capital projects listed in the downtown vision plan. And, the traffic circle project is getting ready to take off. And honestly, we've been probably hammering on that thing for 6 years. So, that was, the idea was NCDOT funded projects. And so, clearly a capital project, the town has got skin in the game. And in order for us to try to limit our skin in these games on these capital improvements identified in the downtown vision plan, we've got to be a good partner with NCDOT. And so we should probably be starting on, I think it's H1 through H3 in the list, which is the downtown sidewalks. Because, we've put the handrails up, but yeah, we could do a heck of a lot better from a safety perspective and a usability perspective. So that's a whole list. There's many items identified in that downtown vision plan that qualify as, I think, the capital improvements.
Okay, great. And speaking of DOT and sidewalks and infrastructure, as you may recall, if you're familiar, I know Mr. Fiocco is from a TARPO perspective, that if you bike and ped projects are eligible on our roads or local infrastructure, that DOT will basically be a pass-through from federal money to us. We have a 20% match on those projects that go into the STIP, and we have to administer the project. So we do all the contracting, we do all that stuff. We have to use kind of federal forms and DOT's specifications for at least procuring the project. But a capital project fund is a great example. So if we have $1 million sidewalk project that DOT funds, well, we're only on the hook for $200K. So we would administer the project. We'd have the capital project fund with $1 million in it. We would pay for the project and be reimbursed for $800,000 from DOT using federal dollars. So basically we would get $1 million, funnel that $800K in reimbursement back to the capital project fund and do it all over again. And so again, those funds are great vehicles to house that kind of money. So that's, I know tangent to Commissioner Fioco's comment, but it reminded me with sidewalks and DOT. But directly to Mr. Fioco's comment, I think that, again, the downtown vision plan, again, we have a lot of these adopted plans. We have the bike and pedestrian plans. We're going to have more plans that I'll talk about here in a few minutes with new and other projects. They're going to have projects embedded in those. You know, take these adopted plans and use them. Don't just put them on the shelf. Again, those are your policies. That's your priority. So use those documents to develop your budget to make those things come to life. And I think that's a great example with that downtown vision plan of pull things out of there every year and get it done. And then lo and behold, 5 years or 10 years, everything will be done. And we'll work on another downtown vision plan for what the new status quo is. And it'll be great. So in terms of, we'll jump on down to added debt service.
Well, Chris, if we may
go ahead.
dwell for, Chris, sorry, if we may dwell for a moment longer on capital projects, just to get a better understanding in my head. Kyle, I think mentioned parks improvements. And you said that that might be considered a new fund called recreation. In addition to, as Jim mentioned, the tennis and miscellaneous other parks, Freeman Park, I think we're going to need to, have we done anything on that? Lewis Freeman Park? I don't think we did anything in this year's budget on that. That's
I don't recall seeing anything.
yeah. There's been a public effort to push for a skate park some time ago, and that hasn't, it may have languished, but I know that there would still be support for that. And I'm sure there are other improvements that a park manager would come in and identify. But would with DOT projects where there's an opportunity to enhance a DOT project like the Hillsborough Street widening project, where they're probably not going to have any funds in there for trees, but trees would be such an appropriate amenity to put in the margin between the paved road and the multi-use pathway. Would that be a capital project?
It could be a one-off project. Again, it depends on like how frequent some of these projects go. And that's the brilliance. And I'll use this one as an example, is that you hope to have available fund balance to pay for something like that. You go, hey, we don't have a tree and landscaping capital project fund, which you could have, where you go take down $10,000 worth of trees and plant them somewhere. But if you say, oh, well, this is a one-off thing, we would love to pay for that betterment. That's the good thing of having that available fund balance, is that for something that you didn't contemplate as a capital project fund, that you still have some monies available to react and go, hey, we would love to pay for that betterment. You know, hey, we want to bury that power line, going there, those types of things that we hope to have, again, your budget set up in a way that gives you some flexibility to go, oh, God, man, I wish we had thought about that and had some monies available for it.
Well, aspirationally, the board, with the leadership of former Commissioner Bet Wilson Foley last year, we set for ourselves that we would support her forming a Tree City USA chapter. She has done some work on that. The pandemic has interrupted those meetings, but she does have a group of people who are ready and willing to be the board. Establishing that board was the first task in that, but the other thing was to establish a tree fund. And that, as I recall our conversations, friends, help me if I'm recalling incorrectly, but I think our conversation was that we were spending enough already through Tyndall Tree Service to just simply categorize that as our tree fund. But if we were to do that in earnest, there's a number of trees around town that will probably be needing maintenance in not too distant future. That plus new installations and the opportunities like the Hillsborough Street project or maybe others. That might be something to consider.
Yeah, and that probably folds nicely into, you know, again, long term. Right now, it seems like, oh, geez, probably don't need that. But in terms of, I'll say for like an arborist position on
Yeah.
staff,
Yeah.
we'll have enough tree cover in town that, you know, there'll be enough demands and requests out of HOAs that are on public roads, out of town parks, things of that nature as we go through maintenance. You know, having, you know, either a part-time or full-time arborist would be a real big help.
Yeah.
As our jurisdiction grows. And they would be heavily involved in the Tree City stuff.
And again, just to clarify, the I&I that you mentioned, that is, we're already in the process of, we've been allocating capital for that. And is that right?
Yeah, I think this year we've got $250,000 as a line item for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to mention one thing. I don't want to get into the weeds on any item, obviously, that's not budget related, but John's comment about the trees for the Hillsborough Street improvement, I'd like to see and explore the idea that it's an NCDOT project using NCDOT complete streets design, which I think includes trees in the typical cross section, but I'd like to frame that as not a betterment, but part of the cross section of the roadway. I don't know if, yeah, I honestly don't know when DOT builds a street to complete street standards, whether it includes those trees, but it clearly includes those trees in the concept of the design.
Thank you, Michael. I'd made a similar inquiry at that public meeting they had.
Yeah.
And get a real strong response, but they
Yeah.
nodded their heads.
Yeah, because they make an extra wide verge, you know, that they say can accommodate the tree. So
Yeah.
I don't know, but I'd like us to, I guess, get better versed in that, and maybe I can do some research as well. But wanted to put just a bug in your ear, Chris, about what your awareness is on that and knowledge.
I will say every complete streets that DOT said they did, they never did it according to the complete street manual. So, and it wasn't just sheer a lack of trees. It was other things and accessories. At the end of the day, every complete street project I've been a part of started that way and ended up being a simple resurfacing project. So,
Oh gosh.
Again, you know, they add up over time. DOT will probably push back against trees, but probably easy enough for us to spend, you know, a couple $100 per tree and put them in.
You know,
But if they pay for them, all the better.
Right.
I'll speak with Brandon Jones about that. Anything else on the capital projects? And again, we can come back to all this if there's time, and obviously we've got months and months to talk about these things as well. Okay, we'll go over to debt service. Again, debt service, the only thing we're really looking at adding for next year is the ladder truck. We anticipate that ladder truck will get purchased. I've been again talking very, very often with Chief Griffin, and that they had conversations about trying to order it before the end of October. That didn't work out. They couldn't get the specs dialed in. For those who aren't aware, fire apparatus typically takes 11 to 12 months to construct, especially a ladder. So I think Chief Griffin's leaning towards E1 for the brand of that. And our ladder trucks are all custom jobs. You know, there's no dealership that you can go buy one from. And so we would be looking at probably picking up a half-year payment of debt service on the ladder truck next year. And then, you know, again, over the next probably 5 to 7 years, most likely paying that. Town Hall, I don't anticipate we'll have a debt service payment next year. Same with the Sanford sewer line. Both those projects, conservatively, based upon where we're at in the process with both those projects, I'm thinking the Sanford sewer line will turn on and Town Hall, the front door will be open on January 1st, 2023. That sounds like an awful long time away, but it'll be here before we know it. Both those things are, you know, 18-month builds. We got to go through the LGC on both of them. The bidding process, they're very expensive projects. And And so again, I know the Sanford sewer line, you'll have more conversation on that Monday night with the EREID. But we're looking at, probably 2 years out fiscal year wise before we have debt service on the Sanford sewer line. And then probably a similar amount of time for the town hall building. So I don't anticipate we'll have too much there. Obviously, we have more conversations and see what kind of vehicles that we need going into that, and whether we choose to pay cash or use debt service to pay for those. Again, our saturation point is not that great right now, so or not too much. It's actually a good position, not to confuse the wording. We're not heavily saturated with debt service, so we're in good shape, but we have to take on some more next year. And there's varying opinions about debt service. I'll say from the general fund side, I lean on average projects more, perhaps the Dave Ramsey side of things, of try to pay cash for it. On the enterprise fund, where you're dealing with infrastructure that's 50 to 100-year infrastructure, it's not a Chevrolet Silverado, that Kyle, you have to buy every couple of years because they run down.
Knew that was coming.
I had to get Jay laughing on that one. But with water and sewer infrastructure, you're talking 50 to 100-year improvements. It's a lot to ask one ratepayer fiscal year to cover the cost of a big project like that. So I have a little more of a palate and appetite for debt service in the enterprise fund than I do on the general fund side. Obviously, we want to be very conscious about how the payments are getting split up for what the projects are. And knowing that, we want to keep our debt down as much as we can, because it gives us the ultimate flexibility long-term if we have less debt. So that's kind of my personal philosophy from a professional standpoint. Is general fund's more cash oriented, and enterprise fund, it's a little more appropriate to take on debt because the infrastructure lasts so much longer than most general fund projects. But again, we'll evaluate year to year and see what those projects need to be. We want to be very flexible, but have a general idea in our policy mind when we go to that. And we'll talk obviously more about that as the projects come to fruition and we look at our options about whether we want to extend the payment over a few years or just go ahead and knock it out, knowing that we may have to do the same thing again the next year. Moving on to staffing needs. One of the, yes,
Chris,
sir.
one question. I think you grouped the Sanford line and Town Hall as being complete in January 2023. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. We think both of them will be under construction next summer.
Yeah.
Again, we are hoping to get to the bid process early in calendar year 21. Go to bid, get the bids in hand, go to the LGC in probably mid to late spring, and then hopefully get a contractor mobilized in the summer and looking at 18 months to build both. So obviously separate projects, different contractors certainly. I'd be impressed if someone could do both. But
No, let's not do that.
depends on what the economy of scale is. We might make it work. But again, I think that'll be a nice shiny day for all of Pittsburgh when those two things are going live. So any other questions on that? Okay. Looking at staff needs, obviously, I think this is an expected conversation. I've had conversations with, I think, the mayor and a couple others and said, what do we need? I'm like, we probably need 10 people. I'm not sure what 10 people we need, but we probably need 10. And obviously that's kind of a tongue-in-cheek comment, but for again, kind of a philosophical thing as we go through the budget, I like a trim organization. I don't like a lot of fluff and in terms of personnel, because the more it's expensive, it's space that you have to pay for. It creates a lot of inefficiencies. If you ever turn into a downturn, you get to a 2008, 2009, I do not ever want to get into a situation where you have to furlough people. I want to make sure, but at the same token, I don't want to overwork people. We have a lot of people doing a lot of things right now. And so I think we will need some more support from the staff side of things with some new positions. Obviously in strategic places, Some of those, just some of our maintenance workers. Certainly in our, as we go to town hall, we'll probably look at some custodial staff that we currently contract out. And so as we get more space and there's probably more to fill up a 40-hour work week, we'll look at adding those positions rather than contracting everything out. And then some other positions that we've talked about before, I think it's really important to have a really good professional as a human resources director. I think it's been really important for us to have a good public information officer, for us to, especially as we grow, to get information disseminated out to our public, be it on the website, be it press releases, be it on Facebook, all those outlets that we have. Fortunately, we can see, I think, in my opinion, a good example. Kara Dudley at the county, I think, does a tremendous job of pushing information out. And she does several press releases a day at times. And so I think it's a good interaction for both the board to get information out, for staff to get the information out, and consistently work with our citizenry and residents. As our operation grows, and we're probably already there, I think our public works and utilities have always been kind of synthesized together. Mr. Poteet, obviously his preference is to work on utilities. That's what his background's in. I would advocate for what I would call a traditional public works director, someone who's looking at infrastructure that is not a wet utility, roads, sidewalks, park maintenance, right-of-way maintenance, things of that nature. I think we could find someone there that could really dial us in there and allow Mr. Poteet to do what he loves, which is utilities, and then have someone doing the other non-wet utility type operations from a public works perspective.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I dare say, I think things have been a bit neglected on that side.
Yeah, there's just a lot to attend to. I mean, when I'm working with John and I'm, quote unquote, beating him up over something with water and sewer, and then I get a street sign that goes down, trying to get enough people to react to that. So a lot of the positions that we'll seek are not all office positions. So that, they may not be seated in town hall, but they might be a couple guys on a crew, fixing potholes or putting signs up or, blowing leaves, whatever. I mean, all those types of things that I think our guys do a good job, but I think they just can't cover all the space that we have.
Yeah.
As we increase our park space, Chatham Park would love to give us the 10 acres at Vineyard Park, which is now the Knight Community Farm Park. They're itching to give us another 40 acres south of us here as a park. And we just frankly don't have the ability to take care of those things right now. And so there's some staffing there that's going to involve a pickup truck, a couple guys, a trailer, and a mower. And so we'll be attending to those things that way. So all the requests are not all office positions. It's a combination of maybe some directors, some mid-level staffing. I'd love to get a purchasing officer in here. From a fiscal control perspective, separating finance from your purchasing is a really common and I think appropriate thing to do. So we don't, Heather is as good as they come as far as I'm concerned, but we don't need to subject her to be kind of steering the purchasing and the finance side. That is a clear way to have fraud in your organization.
Yep.
I think we don't have to worry about that with Heather, but as we grow, there's going to be a lot of purchase demands and a lot of finance demands, and she won't be able to do all that herself. And so I think having that purchasing officer will be a big help. We've been working very hard trying to get a town engineer. So it sounds weird that we're going to add more engineers potentially, but looking at, again, some of the same work of having, an environmental engineer, looking at stormwater, looking at those types of things that are so important to our community. In addition to just having the site civil that we're accustomed to within a municipality. It doesn't all have to be, PEs that command a high salary. It's, the EITs that are, cutting their teeth on some stuff too, that can provide a big help as far as the engineering department goes. I think we would be well served by having a grant writer. We can work within our departments and, including myself, we can try to take time and do those things. But anybody who's ever done a CDBG grant, it will eat you alive if you have other things to do. I can promise you that.
I think a
And
grant writer would pay for itself over and over, almost right from the start.
I agree. I think they would. And again, think about our partners too. It's not just grants that happen to be through the town. It's things that might pass through the town.
Right.
Historic property type things. Grant writing on behalf of Main Street Pittsburgh. Grant writing on behalf of the Boys and Girls Club.
Yep.
Grant writing on behalf of whomever.
Affordable housing.
Exactly. And so there's a lot of things that I think we could certainly fill the day of someone there that would reap so many rewards. And that kind of dovetails to a later conversation about the other revenue opportunities. If we have that there, it's an expenditure, but it's one that you hope reaps rewards, 5 or 10-fold of what that position actually cost.
Yeah.
Code enforcement. Code enforcement is going to be an ever-growing thing. We've all seen the overgrown lots. We've all seen, signage out of compliance and things of that nature. I've had the conversations probably more frequently with Commissioner Shipp than anyone else, but code enforcement is a very tough job. Sauer City currently contracts it out. I think we'd want to start there, because if you start code enforcement with an employee, they will quit. I promise you they will quit. You kind of need a third party to kind of go around and talk to people about it. And if people ruffle their feathers, we're not burning the bridge with that individual employee. Certainly we want to be, not kicking doors down and just charging everybody fines and penalties and stuff. That's not the intention of it. But again, it's working with those folks. And to start them out, you're going to burn some bridges by starting it out. So
Yes.
I think my recommendation would be to contract it out initially. And then once the dust settles a little bit, let's hire someone that really can develop the relationships that we so need in code enforcement. Because it's a awkward dance of enforcement and empathy at the same time. People generally do not intentionally break our ordinance. They're either unaware, they couldn't afford to comply, some other reason there. And so us being able to work with and partner with those folks to make sure that they comply with our ordinance, and not always be so punitive in nature with it, I think will be really good for us. Construction inspections, I think that's an obvious thing. That's something we're going to need to revamp over time, and add bodies. Just looking at the water and sewer infrastructure, road infrastructure that's going to be going in. I think we'll need that. Trying to think if there's anything else I had on my list here. And I guess the only other thing that was like kind of human resource related is, this year we're going to hopefully get a request out soon for our pay study and our personnel manual.
Yes.
To upgrade those. And there's just always that, when you do a pay study, there's an insinuation that whatever it comes out with, through that, you pull the thing on the slot machine, whatever it comes out to, you're kind of subjecting yourself to paying that. It's not a guarantee, but it's something that we need to consider as we look at the budget, is if there's some adjustments that go up and someone went from 45,000 to 55,000, we got a budget for that. And so there's going to be likely some adjustment increases there to the budget overall.
Well, and I think that if Miss Pamela were here, I've heard her say on a couple of occasions that the impact to morale of having previously done pay studies and not responded to that with action in increased salaries, that was harmful.
Oh yeah. If you're unsure about whether you want to do it, don't do it. That would be my recommendation. Again, there's always I think I've found no other reason to think that our employees are anything but reasonable. I think if it was a dramatic increase, I think they would recognize, hey, we can't take on maybe $1 million the first year or whatever, if that number were to be that high. I don't think we'll be that far off. But I think it's a good opportunity for us to communicate that a lot lot of onus on me to communicate that to my staff and say, hey, the board, y'all have shown historically to be very supportive of staff. And so I think that whatever that would come out to be, I think it would be the same way. But I think everyone is hopefully professional enough to understand that the numbers are what the numbers are, and we can't always do everything that we would like.
Yeah. Chris, on the HR front, have you been hearing need from our police department for increased positions as well?
Not necessarily from the police department. The one position that I threw on the list when I spoke to y'all before was kind of the deputy chief position. And I had a lot of conversations with Shorty about that, to not suggest that, hey, you're chief now, here's some help, because we don't think you can do it. It's less about that. It's more about, obviously with Troy and his tenure, and working with some of our younger officers who I think will be our succession plan and our next leaders within our department. And I think that deputy chief will also take a branch where Shorty's so focused on the overall operation and kind of being in charge of everything that happens with the police. I envision that deputy chief being kind of the arm of the police department where it's focused on more of the outreach type things. We currently have the community police officer, and Delane does a great job with that. But being more intentional, because the reporting that's done with that, a lot of the performance management measures that are done with that, I think that's best of someone with a chief behind their name to kind of steer us in the right direction. There's going to be an overhaul of a lot of police departments. We have a very good one here, in my opinion, but we can always get better. And so I think Shorty's going to bring us a lot of good things. And I think, a deputy chief position focused on that community engagement, focused on make sure we're hitting our marks of performance and how we engage our clients, so to speak, is going to be really important. But overall, I don't hear a big demand for, I need 6 more officers.
Okay. Well, I took away from last winter's budget workshop where we heard from, at that time, Chief Percy, the distinct need, kind of pent up need. And I don't remember the specific details, whether it was new heads, more heads, or maybe it was the vehicles that you have been undertaking. Do others recall that?
I think a
general
lot of
conversation?
that, was related to overtime with the statues. And
Yes.
I mean, that caused a lot of burnout last year,
Yeah.
which thankfully we've escaped a lot of that this year. But I do recall the discussion about that, and support it.
In the HR area, Chris, I just ask that we also take a careful look at whatever our incentive programs are to reward those people who are really going above and beyond. And
Yeah, and that's one thing I want to upgrade too. We currently don't do
right.
a good job of consistent performance evaluations.
Yeah.
We've talked a little bit about that at the board level. But again, as awkward as those conversations can be, I think they're really important conversations to have so people know where they stand.
Yes.
And so those are the perfect times to say, hey, you did a fantastic job this year, like really above and beyond what your basic duties were. We'd like to reward you with,
right.
A bonus or whatever it may be. Again, even $100 is something. And so, again, it's so if people know that there's no option unless the board approves a COLA, you kind of get the, well, I'm going to do enough not to get fired, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't think we have too many of those, but again, I think having that consistent conversation with performance evaluations tied to merit is good.
But as we get a little bigger, they'll be having some of those conversations. I mean, in terms of, look at that person, they're doing diddly squat and I'm busting my rear and they're getting the same money I am. I mean, that is bound to occur within an organization as you get a little bigger.
Sure, there's always a regression to the mean
Yeah.
unless there's a carrot out there to show that you can be rewarded for your efforts.
Yeah.
All right. In the essence of time, I'm going to go through real quickly on these new other projects. So the ones I've identified that I think we're going to add into the budget for next year, or at least we're going to try to, and see what the numbers fall, is I'd like us to do a utility rate study to kind of see where these things fall out. That to be tied with a more formal CIP on the water and sewer side, which will likely end up being a redo of the SDF as well. So kind of developing what the projects that we need. We're going to have the water asset management plan that Hydrostructures, we greenlighted them a couple weeks ago. They're going to have that done by June 30th. We'll have some preliminary information from them before the budget's complete. And so we have the sewer one from a couple years ago, the water AMP that'll be done this year, having those kind of existing infrastructure in the ground, understanding what the new projects need to be, developing that capital project fund over the next 20 years, figuring out what those costs are, looking at what potentially our SDF revenue could be, because on the enterprise fund side, the only revenues you have are enterprise fund rates like water and sewer rates, and then the SDF. So very, very limited amount of revenue sources to go into that. And so seeing how we need to handle, debt service with some of our bigger projects, what we can do with cash. And so I think there's going to be a real inspection of our utility side. We just frankly have too many clay pipes and too many 2-inch galvanized water lines out there. Fire flows suffering. We really need to start looping water lines, making sure everything goes in at 6 or 8 inches or greater. And that's just going to make us a more happy and better served community overall. And so we don't have all these, quality is always, especially here has been kind of a question. If you loop water lines, you do those other things, it helps with your quality of water. You take the sediment out and such. So I think we'll see what we can do there. I would like us to look at a strategic plan. We've got the kind of tied in, we have the UDO that we hope to have adopted in this current budget year. With that, we haven't updated our future land use plan since 2012. So from a zoning and planning construct, I think we'll adopt future land use plan and look at one for next year. But then beyond that, I think a strategic plan for the town-wide operation of saying, okay, where do we want to be in 5 years? And, the future land use plan is kind of a function of that. The bike and pedestrian plan is kind of a function of that. But having that strategy to say, hey, here's what we want to be in 5 years, and here's how we're going to get there. And then that way that's really your main budget document as far as your guiding policy year in, year out is. And honestly, when we have my performance evaluation in January of every year, you're going to pull that document out and go, Chris, did we hit the marks or do we not? And so that's that strategy to say, those are kind of the goals that you have for me, and as kind of the leader of your operation, so that we know what we're trying to do, and we're not just doing to do. So I think that's an important project. And then beyond that, some smaller things. I put in there to your notes about a Citizens Academy. That's not an overly expensive thing, but I think that's something that is very beneficial, especially in a growing community, a community that has new residents moving into it. Even the ones that have been here for 50 years, it's important for them to kind of see our operation. It allows us to engage at a different level. A lot of times we only engage when we have problems. And so it allows us to kind of be a little more proactive with our residents. And so I think we can do a tremendous version of that here in Pittsburgh. And then a smaller expenditure, obviously, like as we look to use American Legal for our update for our code of ordinances, looking at some of the minutes and budgeting some money so we can take the minutes to American Legal as well, so they're searchable. Again, we're going to look at doing maybe 20 minutes this year with some existing monies that we have. We hopefully we can cover that without too much efforts or expense, and then see if you like them. If you do, then we might look at doing more historical years and put that in there. I know they're valuable for myself. I think they're valuable for the board to be able to go back and reference other policy decisions and see, you know, kind of little glimpse into what was going on whenever a decision was made. And minutes can be a big help to understanding, oh, well, if I had known that, maybe I would have been a little less scrutinized on that decision of that old person that was here before me. So,
Yeah,
and
on
then,
that, on that
go
note,
ahead.
Chris, that kind of ties a loop back up to something we were discussing earlier, your questions about public engagement and transparency on the budget process. It occurred to me that as you've made yourself aware, there's a number of documents that are not searchable. And I wonder what priority you might place on doing a similar process with American Legal on our budget documents from prior years.
We could.
If only just the final approved budgets, having those converted back into actual text searchable documents, I think would be a commendable gesture towards transparency during current year processes.
Yeah, I can look into that. We can either look at like someone like American Legal, or we can find, you know, perhaps just a 100-word a minute typer who can blast through a budget and maybe put
Well,
it into a PDF that's more searchable. But
I think the documents ought to be on file, and maybe Miss Alice could be asked if they are recoverable, because I'm pretty sure that in some instances they were literally printed out and then put into a scanner so that they would not be text searchable.
Hmm.
I think the documents should be there electronically.
yeah, I mean, if someone wants to find it, they'll find it. So
Yeah.
I would assume if I'm gonna be walking around the bee's nest, I assume not just slap it on the way to it. So we certainly won't be doing anything like that. We'll make everything will be a PDF. It'll be,
Yeah.
you know, Control F searchable, and we got nothing to hide.
Yeah, thank you. But I would hope that we wouldn't have to retype it, is what I'm getting at. I do think the
Yeah,
document.
I would hope not to, but if we have to, we have to. I'll look into that. The one real quick thing here, and again, I want to be very sensitive on time. The new revenue opportunities, one of those identified and I shared with you before was if you look at statute 20-97, that's kind of it's a street and sidewalk infrastructure type funding, some public transit funding. Our distant communities use this and they go to the full $30. You can do it in $5 increments. A lot of boards, again, I'm kind of testing the waters with this a little bit. Again, you know, every little bit helps. $5 to us is about $25,000 in revenue based on our current number of vehicles. And what this is it's almost a guaranteed revenue because since the state combined your tax and your tags together, the collection is nearly 100%. Some boards shy away from this type of stuff because it is regressive, which means that it's a flat fee. It's not based on value. But again, looking at maybe a $5 or $10 fee, you know, doesn't have to be this year. Doesn't have to be $10, could be $5 or whenever we'd like to do it. But to appropriate that into a sidewalk fund that would be kind of a Kickstarter every year. And as we grow, that $5 would grow, obviously, and you know, that 25,000 will become 50 and become 100, et cetera. And we're getting that infrastructure paid for. You can do it for streets. You know, PAL bill funding, we don't get a ton of money for it. We'll get less money this year than we would have. Otherwise, PAL bill funding is certainly gone down with all the gas tax revenues that we receive from the state. So I just bring those up, not to say that they're absolutes, but to say that if there are any shortfalls and we're not prepared to raise tax, that there might be some other ways where we say, hey, rather than charge you, you know, your millage of 43, how about you just pay $5 once a year on your car, and that helps us offset some of that, so we don't have to raise taxes. So again, it's all a fee, it's all revenue, and I get that, but just trying to find perhaps some alternative or more creative approaches to funding what we want to fund. And again, it's the board's priorities and what you wish to fund, and we'll make it work on our end. But that was just one of the new revenue opportunities that I've identified, and we'll look at other ones. Obviously, new revenue could also be grants. It could be other types of things that we haven't historically used here in Pittsburgh. So again, I welcome any feedback that you may find. If you say, hey, I thought someone did this in Cary, or read about this in the paper for Apex or whatever. We've got a lot of communities around us that have been doing it very well for a very long time. And so we can borrow from them and see what they've used in the past to make themselves successful, to allow us to be continually successful as well. I will skip over discussion of new projects to be funded in this fiscal year that may be for next year. There'll be plenty of time to talk about that as we get further into the budget process. I would like to spend just a couple moments about what you think maybe next steps are. If you found this conversation beneficial, do you want to dial in more on some items? Do you want to do something, in December or in January? Right now, again, your schedule has it laid out where the next time that you'll have a formal conversation will be your budget retreat in April. But it's intentionally kind of left open after the scoping session here today to say, what would you like to do next? I think, meeting every other Wednesday is probably too much, but maybe once a month, or, maybe we meet in January before we go to the April meeting to give you kind of a status update or something like that. Maybe that helps. I certainly want to be considerate of your time, but also want to give you the proper time to be involved in the process, because we don't want to just show up and say, here's your budget. We want to say, hey, we worked very diligently with you on developing this budget, and here's what we came up with for your consideration.
Well, I'll tell you, I think I would be interested in meeting in December if folks are up to it.
I would too.
Similar to what we've just done, from 5 to 6:30, something like that. And the discussion of new projects that are to be funded in the fiscal year, that would be a fantastic topic to start with.
Okay. Well, if we'll iron out a date. I'll send an email to the board and confirm times and dates, but we'll look at a kind of a 5 to 6:30 at some point in December. And for everyone's sake, what we'll do is we'll limit the conversation. It'll be budget in general, but the primary topic being kind of the new budget request.
Yeah, I think that'd be excellent.
Okay.
And I think honestly, the sooner in December, the better, because I think as the holidays approach, people start to really kind of relax and want to just take some time off.
Yep.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, we want to give you the proper time to celebrate. People will be traveling to and from places potentially. And so I'm not going to give you a meeting on like December 21st. It'll be a single digit for sure.
Okay, good, because I won't be there on the 21st, sir.
Hey, it's Zoom. You can be wherever.
Yeah, right.
Jokes
wherever I am, I won't be
you to show up. Well, I appreciate everybody being 11 minutes over time. If there's not any other questions, Mayor, I'll pitch it to you for a motion to adjourn.
Well, Chris, I'd like to give just a quick response, if I may, regarding new revenue opportunities. I really appreciate your delivery of that. Duly noted. You've brought it up. You've mentioned that it is a regressive impact, and I would prefer to look to other options. And given the great bulk of continuing work that is ongoing with our partners, Chatham Park Investors, I'm really curious about furthering that conversation there. And the idea was raised several times over the past 2 years of maybe a negotiation with them for what do they call it? Future or forward annexations. Maybe that's one idea for additional revenue out of Chatham Park. I don't know.
All right.
Well, Chris, I want to, I think this was a very timely and a great way to start out
Yes,
the discussion of our budget cycle. And I think by starting early and by having regular sessions where the board and you can discuss further the budget, it will mean, number one, I think we'll answer some of the questions concerning public transparency, particularly if we get the word out more that these budget sessions are occurring. And then secondly, it'll, I think, produce a much better quality document than we would have otherwise. So thank you for putting this together for us.
absolutely. Tremendously good start.
Yes, sir. Great. Well,
Very
I'm
encouraging.
happy to help, and I'm glad it's effective for y'all. And again, that's my goal here, is to make sure that I'm providing y'all what y'all need to be good stewards of the community, working on behalf of our citizens. So anything I can do to help throughout this process, that's why I'm here.
Okay. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, I would entertain then a motion to adjourn.
Motion to
Move.
adjourn.
Second.
Second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Well, again, thank you all. And Chris, you have a good trip and relax a little bit.
I'll try to do my best. The weather looks like it's turning out to be a little better than expected, so I won't probably have frostbite when I come back.
All right. Very good. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Good night, everyone.